How do you respond when the enemy literally emerges from another dimension? When every plan you have, every doctrine is suddenly just obsolete?
It's truly remarkable looking at the initial phase, how quickly the situation escalated beyond any known framework. The report really emphasizes this almost biological failure of conventional planning.
Biological failure.
How so? Well, in the sense that our systems are evolved, designed for known threats, natural disasters, terrorism, conventional warfare. We have protocols, muscle memory almost. But this wasn't a natural disaster, something we have extensive protocols for. It was, from the very first moments, a military incursion.
But nobody saw it that way initially.
Exactly. No one had the context to even begin to understand that. And that led to this profound, really tragic disconnect between the actual threat and the initial response. Every step taken early on, while perfectly logical within a known emergency management framework, was just utterly outmatched by the reality unfolding on the ground.
Okay, let's dive into that first phase then. Phase 1. Incursion and initial response. This covers H plus 0 to H plus 12. The unthinkable unfolds.
Right at the start.
Our timeline begins precisely at H plus 0.00. That's 14.37 Mountain Standard Time. This is the moment the report marks the manifestation of a significant atmospheric and spatial anomaly over an unincorporated public park there in Arapahoe County.
And we're talking initial sensor data here, right? Not eyewitnesses yet.
Yes, exactly. Air traffic control meteorological stations. They start registering these localized electromagnetic and barometric fluctuations. Weird readings. But for those first critical seconds, maybe a minute, there was no visual confirmation, just strange data points.
So it's the eyewitnesses on the ground, the ones frantically dialing 911, who provide the first truly bizarre and alarming report.
Yeah, and those initial 911 calls, they tell a story of just escalating disbelief. Within 90 seconds, dispatchers were completely deluged with calls describing this shimmering, silent vortex of pure light.
Not static either. The reports say it was expanding.
Right, expanding vertically about 50 feet above the ground. And over the next 5 minutes or so, instead of just dissipating like you'd expect some weird weather thing to do, this vortex stabilized. It formed this persistent ovular aperture, roughly 300 meters wide, 150 meters high.
Like a window.
Appearing, and this is the quote from the report, as a window into a different, mountainous and completely alien landscape.
Wow, a window into another world, right there above a park.
Literally. And this immediately created what the report calls an information fog. You see, the initial reaction from civilians on the ground wasn't immediate widespread panic. Not right away.
More confusion, awe even.
Yeah, a really bizarre blend of awe, confusion, and this frantic race to pull out smartphones and document it all. Which, led to this overwhelming flood of low-quality video and just wildly speculative commentary across all social media platforms.
So the digital noise actually hurt the response.
Severely. Early narratives were all over the place. People guessing it was a complex hologram, some unknown weather event, you name it. This digital saturation, the report says, severely hampered emergency dispatchers and news agencies from forming any coherent, actionable picture of what was actually happening. It just clogged the channels, distorted reality for the people trying to coordinate a response.
It's a critical early lesson, isn't it? How our modern information environment can both inform and sometimes paralyze in a crisis.
Absolutely. And then the situation takes a terrifying turn. As our timeline progresses to H plus 0.05, just 5 minutes after the portal appeared, the impossible became horrifically, undeniably real.
This is first contact.
First hostile contact.
Right.
The first entities emerged from that shimmering gateway. The report describes them as bipedal humanoids, significantly larger and more muscular than humans, later designated orc-equivalent infantry.
Not high-tech invaders, then.
No, that's the weird thing. They weren't armed with lasers or advanced firearms. They wielded primitive melee weapons, axes, swords, and crude bows. But here's the absolutely critical observation right there in the initial assessment. Their first actions were not a disorganized, chaotic rush.
They had a plan.
It seemed like it. They executed a methodical, tactical advance to secure a 360-degree perimeter around their side of the portal. This organized military-like behavior, the report stresses, was the absolute first, undeniable indicator that this was deliberate incursion, a planned invasion, not some random, chaotic phenomenon.
That methodical advance is chilling. It implies intent, organization, command structure, even.
It screamed military operation.
Yeah.
But, who on the ground would recognize that for what it was? Law enforcement at this point, they were completely unprepared for anything remotely resembling this. And the consequences Well, the report details them devastatingly. They were immediate and tragic.
So the first responders arrive.
Between H plus 0.09 and H plus 0.20, first units from Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office, Aurora Police Department. They arrive on scene. They'd been dispatched to what was initially coded as an explosion or public disturbance.
Standard procedure, but totally wrong context.
Totally. And their radio transmissions, which were later analyzed, they paint this picture of just complete cognitive dissonance. You hear officers struggling, trying to use standard terminology for something utterly alien, reporting individuals in heavy costumes with real weapons and, I mean, literally a hole in the sky.
Their training wouldn't cover this.
Yeah.
At all.
Useless. Active shooter drills, counterterrorism scenarios. None of it applied. And their equipment standard, issue 9mm .40 caliber sidearms, the 5.56mm patrol rifles, tragically inadequate.
Not enough starting power.
Right. The report says while these weapons could injure individual targets, the sheer number, the aggressive nature, the physical resilience of these orc equivalents, they just overwhelmed the officers. Within minutes, those first responding units were overrun, contact lost.
Just silenced.
Yeah. You have to try and imagine being one of those first responders, staring down something completely outside the realm of possibility. How would you react? Knowing your training, your gear, it just doesn't apply to this surreal, terrifying threat. It's a chilling thought.
What becomes incredibly clear in the report is that this wasn't just a conceptual disconnect, it cost lives immediately. The failure of conventional planning against a threat this novel was profound and instantaneous.
So yeah, just minutes after this portal tears open reality, our local emergency services are facing something nobody anywhere could have ever trained for. And as we move into H+1 to H+6 on our timeline, we see the rapid collapse of local control and this escalating plea for state-level intervention.
And the reports from this specific period, they really underscore a fundamental flaw, maybe, in the all hazards doctrine when it slams up against a truly context-free threat.
What do you mean context-free?
Meaning a threat so alien, so outside our experience, that we have no pre-existing mental model or framework to understand it. Every step local authorities took was logical within the known framework of emergency response, but the event itself just completely defied that framework. We saw this tragically with the mass casualty incident declaration.
Right. At H+1.05, the senior-most surviving officer on the perimeter makes that MCI declaration. Yeah. Standard procedure, right?
Yeah.
Activates countywide mutual aid, mobilizes fire departments, EMS from all over the area.
Standard, yes, but completely misapplied here.
Exactly. Here's the devastating reality the report lays bare. MCI plans are meticulously designed for post-incident response. Triage, treatment, transport, but in a secure scene. They're absolutely not designed for an active kinetic combat zone.
So fire and EMS units went into a hot zone?
They tried. Aurora Fire, South Metro Fire. Units attempting to enter the hot zone to render aid came under direct fire from what the report identifies as ADE Archer formations. Multiple ambulances, even a fire engine, were disabled. Crews killed or severely wounded. This forced a general withdrawal of all unarmed first responders by H+1.30.
Heroes walking into the line of fire, but completely unequipped for it.
Undeniably heroic, but their resources, their training, just not suited for this kind of fight. And that operational failure, it just rippled through the entire local command structure.
The EOC couldn't cope.
The Arapahoe County Emergency Operations Center, the EOC, it was stood up at H+1.15. Its job normally is to coordinate resources, manage information during a crisis. But the report says it was immediately crippled by this profound lack of reliable, confirmed information from the scene.
So they were operating blind.
Essentially, yeah. Its function devolved from proactive coordination to this desperate reactive attempt to build situational awareness from, like, chaotic news helicopter feeds before they were grounded and fragmented police radio traffic. Their emergency operations plan, designed for things like wildfires, floods, maybe a large-scale shooting, it contained no annex, no contingency whatsoever for a sustained ground invasion by interdimensional entities. It just wasn't in their playbook.
Unthinkable, literally.
And the media, unfortunately just compounded the confusion. National news networks scrambling for coverage went live. But the reporting was often highly speculative, sometimes wildly inaccurate, which in turn further confused the public, hampered any organized evacuation efforts.
The fog of war, amplified by the 24-hour news cycle.
Right, and the report highlights this critical breakdown, the concept of a Joint Information Center, or JIC, designed for unified public messaging during a crisis. Impossible, because the underlying truth of the event was, for those first crucial hours, simply Too incredible to report as fact. How do you go on air and tell the world that, well, orcs are invading Colorado?
You can't, not without sounding completely unhinged.
So recognizing this complete collapse of local capabilities, the Arapahoe County OEM at H plus 2.30 makes the formal request for state assistance. Up the chain to the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. A desperate plea.
And the state responds quickly.
Almost instantly. Within moments of receiving that briefing, by H plus 3.0, the governor of Colorado issues a verbal declaration of a state disaster emergency that immediately activates the Colorado State Emergency Operations Plan, the SEO, the critical legal step needed for broader state resource allocation.
Which includes the National Guard.
Exactly. At H plus 3.15, the governor formally authorizes the mobilization of the Colorado National Guard. So you see here how the system, designed for known hazards, is hitting its absolute limits. The chain of command is escalating, yes, but the actual understanding of this unprecedented threat, it's still desperately trying to catch up.
The broader implication here is just stark, isn't it? For all our advancements in disaster preparedness, a truly out-of-context event can expose these profound vulnerabilities. Every logical step taken within the existing framework only seemed to highlight how inadequate that framework actually was for this.
And the situation's about to get even worse. As our timeline continues its rapid progression, moving into H plus 6 to H plus 12, the threat escalates again dramatically, and federal awareness finally begins to solidify. This period marks the first true military response, forced by a rapidly deteriorating situation on the ground.
It's truly striking, reading this section of the report, how quickly the nature of the threat evolved. It forced a complete reevaluation of the response. Those initial assumptions like terrorist attack, understandable perhaps, but just completely off the mark.
Our reports indicate that the nature of the threat escalated dramatically, right around H plus 6.30. This is when the first aerial entity emerges.
Not just ground troops anymore.
No, this was different. Described in the report as a large reptilian winged creature capable of projecting a stream of incendiary fluid, later designated, chillingly, a dragon-class ABE, anomalous biological entity.
You're a dragon, literally.
Literally. And its first act, it engaged and destroyed a news helicopter, one that, despite flight restrictions probably being shouted over the radio, was still providing live video from the edge of the growing exclusion zone.
That's a massive escalation.
Huge tactical implications. This single devastating act confirmed a hostile air-to-air and air-to-ground capability for the enemy. Effectively, all remaining civilian and law enforcement air assets, crucial eyes in the sky, like news and surveillance helicopters, were grounded immediately. The state EOC, the county EOC, they were now effectively blind, except for what could be seen from the ground.
That changes the entire game. It's no longer just a ground incursion. This aerial threat immediately forced the realization, okay, this is a multi-domain conflict.
And right around then, H plus 700, the first elements of the Colorado National Guard start arriving on scene. Units from the 193rd Military Police Battalion, the 157th Infantry Regiment, they're establishing initial positions.
With what mission initially? Still support?
Yeah, standard support to civil authorities' mission,
Yeah.
perimeter security, crowd control, helping with evacuations. But they were almost immediately forced into direct combat as these ABE forces began probing outwards from the portal.
And their standard gear wasn't cutting it.
The Kong soldiers, equipped with M4 carbines, 5.56 millimeters, they quickly discovered the severe limitations against the larger orc equivalents. The report notes high pain tolerance, surprising physical resilience. Multiple hits often needed to incapacitate a single target, which means they're burning through ammunition incredibly fast.
A dangerous situation.
Very. So, this confirmation an organized, invading military force with an undeniable air component finally triggers the highest level of escalation. At H plus 8.0, the Colorado SEOC formally requests federal assistance from FEMA Region 8th and the Department of Homeland Security.
Standard procedure again.
Yes, but more critically, the Adjutant General of the Kong, the top guard commander in the state, bypasses some standard channels and delivers a direct, urgent brief to United States Northern Command U.S. Northcom, located right there at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs.
So Northcom is now officially aware.
At this point, yes. U.S. Northcom, the military command responsible for Homeland Defense, now has official situational awareness of a ground invasion with air assets on U.S. soil.
And that immediately kicks off federal actions.
A series of rapid, though maybe initially compartmentalized, federal actions. The FBI, still operating under the understandable, I guess, assumption of a complex terrorist attack, rapidly deploys its hostage rescue team and SWAT assets to the area.
Meanwhile, Buckley,
Buckley Space Force Base, just a few miles from the portal, elevates its readiness to Force Protection Condition Delta. That's its highest alert level. Not just a red light flashing. It means immediate hardening of defenses, intensified patrols, restricted movement, preparing personnel to shelter in place or evacuate. Basically putting the entire military installation on a war footing.
A fortress mentality just miles from the incursion.
And then the final step in this initial phase. At approximately H plus 11.00, the President of the United States receives his first formal briefing on what's now being called the Colorado anomaly in the White House Situation Room. The transition from a bizarre local disaster to an unprecedented national security crisis is complete.
It's just astounding to consider how quickly a nation has to pivot, from believing something is literally impossible to mobilizing its entire defense apparatus.
This timeline, in just a matter of hours, shows that rapid, forced adaptation. Ultimately, what this whole initial phase reveals is that in a single afternoon, an entire military doctrine is being rewritten on the fly. The highest levels of government are now fully engaged in a fight. Well, a fight no one saw coming. Okay, we're now entering phase 2 of our timeline, covering the period from H plus 12 to H plus 72. This marks a really decisive shift. We're moving away from that failing civilian-led response towards a full-spectrum military containment operation.
The objectives become much clearer here, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Establish a stable defensive perimeter, stop any further ABE expansion beyond that initial incursion zone, and critically begin the really arduous process of gathering intelligence on this completely unknown enemy.
If we zoom out for just a moment, this is where established military doctrine starts to kick in. Defense, containment. These are things the military knows how to do. However, they're applying them under completely unprecedented circumstances. The learning curve here is incredibly steep, and every single engagement, every skirmish, provides critical, real-time data that shapes the next steps.
So by H plus 12, as our timeline progresses, the Colorado National Guard is officially designated the lead agency for all security operations within this newly defined exclusion zone, a 15-kilometer radius centered on the portal.
A significant chunk of land.
Huge. And the KONG commander immediately starts implementing a modified cordon doctrine. It's different from, say, a traditional cordon and search used against insurgents where you trap and clear. This is purely defensive. Cordon and contain. Hold the line. Do not let them advance further.
And how is that cordon structured?
Into two distinct components. First, the outer cordon. This was established by the 193rd Military Police Battalion, but augmented by local and state law enforcement who are now effectively under military command. Their mission was crucial, but non-kinetic. Enforce the exclusion zone, manage the civilian evacuation still ongoing, and prevent anyone unauthorized from getting in or out.
Keeping the fight contained and the civilians safe.
Right. Then you have the inner cordon. Manned by the 157th Infantry Regiment, this was the main line of resistance, the sharp end, directly engaging the ABE forces that were still attempting to push out from the portal area.
And this is where those early weapons limitations were really being felt.
Acutely. Which brings us to a really striking aspect of this report. How quickly they adapted classic combat engineering principles to this entirely new threat. They immediately recognized that hasty fighting position, simple roadblocks, they weren't going to cut it.
The engineers became crucial.
Absolutely pivotal. The KNG commander attaches the 947th Engineer Company directly to the inner cordon sector. This was a turning point, according to the analysis. Using their heavy equipment bulldozers, backhoes, cranes, even grabbing repurposed construction vehicles, they began literally transforming the suburban landscape into a fortified defensive line.
What kind of defenses?
Rapidly creating anti-vehicle ditches, which proved remarkably effective against some of the larger charging ABE beasts, huge earthen berms, firing positions reinforced with concrete highway dividers, shipping containers, any heavy debris they could find. These often dumb, as the report calls them, but very physical defenses provided the crucial survivability that allowed these lightly armed guardsmen to hold the line against a numerically superior, incredibly aggressive foe. The immediate adaptation of civil engineering for a combat role was truly impressive.
It's a dramatic shift, isn't it? From pure reaction to a more structured, though still pretty desperately implemented defense. The engineers, working relentlessly, nonstop, become the unsung heroes of this phase, literally shaping the battlefield under fire.
While the KNG fought to stabilize that front line, the political and legal mechanisms for a full federal response were also kicking into high gear in the background. At H plus 14.0, the governor formally requests a presidential major disaster declaration under the Stafford Act.
That unlocks FEMA resources.
Exactly. A procedural necessity for federal funding and large-scale FEMA support. But the more significant military action was within the Department of Defense. At H plus 16.00, the Secretary of Defense authorizes U.S. Northcommon to take all necessary actions for the defense of the homeland. That's the key phrase.
Triggering active duty deployment.
It triggers the formal alert and deployment preparations for active duty units. Specifically, the report names the 4th Infantry Division, based nearby at Fort Carson, just a couple of hours south of the portal. The wheels are now fully in motion for a major federal military response. Moving into H plus 24 to H plus 48, as those containment efforts begin to solidify, the focus shifts hard towards gathering intelligence on this completely new enemy. And it's here that technology really starts to redefine the battlefield.
Which begs the question, how do you even begin to gather intelligence on an enemy with, as we discussed, no discernible electronic footprint? The most pressing challenge during this period, as the report meticulously details, was that profound lack of intelligence due to the ABE's complete lack of electronic communications.
The SIGINT black hole.
Exactly. No signals intelligence, no radio chatter to intercept, no electronic signatures. This forced an immediate and total reliance on imagery intelligence, or IMINT, pictures and video.
Which is where the drones come in. At H plus 25.00, the report marks the first launch of an MQ-9 Reaper Unmanned Aerial System, or UAS, mission. Controlled remotely from a secure location, it enters the airspace over the exclusion zone at medium altitude, well beyond the range of any primitive ABE projectile weapons we knew about then.
And its cameras?
Its multispectral targeting system provided the first clear, stable, high-resolution, real-time video feed of the enemy's dispositions. For the very first time, commanders could actually see what they were up against. Masses of orc-equivalent infantry, but also cavalry mounted on these large wolf-like creatures.
Lupine creatures, the report calls them.
Right, and these hulking, troll-like brutes acting as living siege engines, plus rudimentary catapults and actual siege towers being brought through the portal. This was our first clear look at the scale, the composition, and the medieval but organized nature of the threat.
Seeing is believing, and in this case, seeing was terrifying, I imagine.
But also actionable. This new vital intelligence immediately led to action. At H plus 28.3N, a Reaper crew observes a large concentration of ABE forces massing, clearly preparing for an assault on a section of the inner cordon.
They could see the attack forming.
Exactly. After rapid authorization up and down the command chain, the Reaper engaged. Fired 2 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles. These are anti-armor missiles designed to destroy tanks.
Overkill for infantry.
You'd think, but against tightly packed infantry formations and those big brutes. Devastatingly effective, the report says. It completely broke up the impending attack, prevented a potential breach of the line, and significantly, this marked the first kinetic engagement, the first shots fired in anger by active-duty U.S. military forces against the ABE.
It's truly remarkable how that complete lack of electronic intelligence forced the issue. Our high-tech military had to find entirely new ways to see the enemy. These unmanned systems became quite literally our eyes in the sky and, very quickly, our first decisive long-range firepower.
To get an even broader, more strategic picture, an RQ-4 Global Hawk, a high-altitude, long-endurance UAS, was diverted and brought into play around H plus 3000.
These fly much higher than Reapers, right?
Way higher, over 60,000 feet, far above any conceivable threat from the ground. It began this systematic survey of the entire area. Its powerful cameras provided a wide area view, obviously useful. But even more importantly, its synthetic aperture radar, SAR.
Which can see through clouds and at night.
Exactly. But in this case, remarkably, it managed to penetrate the visual distortion of the portal itself. It provided the first crude but usable radar map of the terrain on the other side.
What did it show?
A vast, mountainous, and seemingly undeveloped landscape, our first hint at the enemy's homeworld. So this combination, the Reaper's tactical close-in view and the Global Hawk's strategic, almost extra-dimensional perspective, became the absolute bedrock of the entire U.S. intelligence effort going forward.
You have to ask yourself, without these drones, these unmanned systems, how truly blind and vulnerable would our forces have been in those first couple of days?
It likely would have been a very different, much bloodier outcome.
Yeah.
Okay, moving into the final stretch of this phase, H plus 48 to H plus 72. This is where we witnessed the first major large-scale engagements that leads to crucial weapons assessments, and the full federalization of the U.S. response is cemented. This is where theory gives way to brutal, bloody reality.
And what's truly striking here, reading between the lines, is how a highly specialized weapon like the Javelin missile, designed for modern tank warfare, perfectly exploited an unexpected weakness in these new, monstrous biological threats. It powerfully validates the value of maintaining a diverse set of niche military capabilities because you simply never know what challenge you'll face next.
The enemy was clearly learning and adapting too, weren't they? At H+plus 49.00, the ABE launches its first really large-scale coordinated assault against the inner cordon. Thousands of orc-equivalent infantry supported by that lupine cavalry and the brutes charging the Katanji positions.
A major test for the Guard.
Huge. And this engagement provided the first real-world hard data on the effectiveness or lack thereof of U.S. weaponry, as they feared the 5.56mm rounds from the M4 carbines severely limited stopping power against the larger ABE combatants. Report confirms often required multiple torso hits to incapacitate.
So heavier weapons were key.
The defense, the report confirms, really hinged on the heavier crew-served weapons. The venerable .50 caliber M2 heavy machine guns Mach Deuce and the powerful 40mm Mk-19 automatic grenade launchers proved highly effective, tearing through enemy ranks, suppressing advances, breaking up formations.
But then the ABE brought out something new.
Yeah, the most critical moment came when the ABE deployed a new, terrifying asset. These massive quadrupedal beasts covered in thick chitinous armor, basically used as living battering rams against the improvised fortifications.
Armored biologicals, the report calls them.
Right. And these things were impervious to small arms fire. Even .50 caliber rounds were just bouncing off in some cases. They posed an existential threat to breaching the inner cordon.
Javelin.
Javelin saved the day. Cawing anti-tank platoons engaged them with the FGM-148 Javelin missiles. And crucially, they employed the missile's top attack mode.
Designed to hit the thin top armor of tanks.
Exactly. And that specific flight profile was perfectly suited here. It allowed the missile to arc up and strike the creature's less protected dorsal spine area. The report uses the phrase catastrophic kills. It prevented what likely would have been a decisive breach of the line. Just incredible tactical adaptation under fire. Wow. Using an anti-tank missile against a giant alien beetle tank.
Very much. Meanwhile, as this intense fighting is raging, the wheels of government kept turning. At H+plus 60.00, the president formally signs the Major Disaster Declaration for Colorado. That unleashes the full might of FEMA for consequence management, dealing with displaced people, infrastructure, etc. But operationally, the key move. The Department of Defense, through U.S. and NORTHCOM, is formally designated the lead federal agency for the military response.
Taking charge from the state.
Officially, a joint task force, JTF Centennial, is established, and the highly experienced commanding general of the 4th Infantry Division, based right there at Fort Carson, is appointed as the JTF commander.
Putting the Army in the lead on the ground. And at H+plus 62.00, the deployment orders are formally issued. The 1st Stryker Brigade Combat Team, a more mobile wheeled vehicle unit, and the 3rd Armored Brigade Combat Team, heavy tanks and Bradleys, both from the 4th Infantry Division, are ordered to deploy rapidly from Fort Carson to the exclusion zone.
The Iron Mountain is coming.
The Iron Mountain, as the 4th ID is famously known, is officially on the move. So what this whole period reveals is just this intense, brutal learning curve. Our troops are finding out, under fire, what works, and just as importantly, what doesn't work, against an utterly unique and frankly terrifying foe. Okay, as our timeline progresses, we're now moving into Phase 3. This covers Day 4 through Day 21. And this period marks the real maturation of the U.S. response. We're shifting from that emergency containment footing to a deliberate, full-scale military operation. This is where the sheer might of the U.S. military truly begins to turn the tide.
And a truly fascinating insight from the report regarding this phase, something we touched on, is the validation of those niche capabilities. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, for instance, an aircraft some considered, a relic of the Cold War, maybe even obsolete in modern peer-to-peer warfare.
A warthog.
The Warthog. It proved to be the definitive solution for the most agile and frankly terrifying enemy asset they faced early on, those dragons. It really is adaptive warfare at its finest, showing that specialized tools, even older ones, still have immense value against unforeseen threats.
So Day 4. Big developments on the national stage. On the evening of Day 4, the president addresses the nation and the world. It was, as the report details, a very carefully calibrated message, designed to project strength, reassure a terrified global public.
How did they frame the enemy?
The ABE was officially designated an unidentified belligerent aggressor. They deliberately avoided speculation about the portal's origins, about what these things were, and focused firmly on defending national sovereignty, projecting resolve.
And legally.
Immediately after that address, the president signed an executive order declaring a national emergency. This was a critical legal step. It unlocked over 130 statutory authorities for the executive branch, allowing for the rapid mobilization of Army Reserve and National Guard units beyond Colorado the redirection of federal funds on a massive scale, and the suspension of certain regulations to just expedite the entire response,
Cutting through red tape.
clearing the decks for war footing.
Pretty much. By day 5, the lead elements of the 4th Infantry Division start arriving in force within the exclusion zone. The 1st Stryker Brigade Combat Team, the 3rd Armored Brigade Combat Team. They execute a formal relief-in-place operation, taking over the inner cordon from those exhausted Qing units.
That must have been a huge morale boost. The report specifically mentions the effect. The sight of M1A2 Abrams main battle tanks, M2A3 Bradley fighting vehicles' heavy armor, powerful cannons moving into firing positions, a quantum leap in firepower and protection. The Colorado National Guard, having held that line heroically for days against overwhelming odds, they rotated back to the outer cordon, handling rear area security. This freed up the active duty BCTs to focus entirely on the direct fight at the portal's edge.
But deploying 2 full brigade combat teams that quickly, the logistics must have been insane.
A challenge of immense proportions, the report calls it. A massive logistics hub, designated LSA Patriot Logistics Support Area Patriot, was rapidly established about 20 miles back from the front line. From there, a constant churning stream of heavy equipment transporters, fuel tankers, supply convoys moved forward through heavily secured routes 2047.
Burning through supplies.
Astronomical rates. Ammunition consumption, particularly .50 cal, 25mm cannon rounds for the Bradleys, 120mm tank rounds for the Abrams, was already exceeding initial planning estimates. This forced U.S. Army Material Command to surge stocks from depots nationwide. An unprecedented logistical effort for a homeland defense scenario. Just keeping the guns fed was a major operation.
And the biggest tactical problem remaining.
Still those Dragon-class ABEs. Their ability to fly over fortifications, attack armored vehicles from above, it poses a serious, persistent threat, even with the heavy armor arriving.
Enter the A-10.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To counter this, squadrons of A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft were rapidly deployed to Buckley Space Force Base nearby. Maintenance crews working around the clock. On day 6, the A-10s flew their first defensive close air support, or CAS, missions, and the results, the report says, were nothing short of decisive.
Why was it so effective?
The A-10, famously designed to survive in a high-threat, low-altitude environment and kill Soviet tanks. It proved to be the perfect anti-Dragon platform. Protected by his iconic titanium bathtub around the cockpit, the pilot could withstand the Dragon's incendiary breath, which analysis quickly determined was a form of biological napalm.
And the gun.
Oh, the gun. The A-10's massive 30mm GAU-8A Avenger Gatling gun, firing this specific mix of armor-piercing incendiary API and high-explosive incendiary HEI rounds. Devastatingly effective. The report uses the phrase, literally shredding the creatures in the air.
Air superiority achieved quickly then.
Within just 48 hours of their first sortie, the A-10s had shot down over a dozen Dragon-class ABEs. They established localized air superiority over the exclusion zone and effectively eliminated the ABE's most potent tactical asset. It's incredible to witness that pivot. From initial chaos to full-scale military might. The Iron Mountain arrives, changing the dynamic, and the A-10, the old warthog, becomes the perfect Dragon Slayer. Okay, as we move into day 814, the crisis takes on a clear international dimension. And critically, real breakthroughs in intelligence begin to emerge, dramatically altering the strategic outlook for the entire conflict.
The broader implication here, which becomes really evident in the UN session described in the report, it highlights this enduring challenge of international cooperation. Even when faced with an existential, potentially universal threat, the world is still so deeply shaped by great power competition. National interests, existing geopolitical tensions, they often take precedence.
Even against interdimensional invaders.
Apparently so. But then you have the human breakthrough described here. That single piece of intelligence, it profoundly changes the entire strategic calculus, shifting the focus potentially from just defense to, well, to offense.
Let's unpack that. On day 9, at the request of several NATO allies, the United Nations Security Council convenes an emergency session. Topic: the Colorado incursion. The U.S. ambassador presents declassified satellite and Reaper imagery. Irrefutable proof, you'd think, of an interdimensional invasion.
How did the council react?
Well, the report states it frankly. The session quickly devolved into a reflection of existing geopolitical tensions. While allies expressed solidarity, Russia and China used the forum to voice concern over the scale of the U.S. military mobilization, carefully framing that as a potential threat to global stability, rather than focusing solely on the ABE threat itself.
Deflecting, almost.
It seems that way. The session ultimately concluded with this heavily watered-down resolution. It condemned the breach of sovereignty, sure, but authorized no collective international action. No UN peacekeeping force heading to Colorado. It's a sobering reminder, isn't it? Even with something this huge, global politics intrudes.
While the diplomats debated, the intelligence community was digging deeper.
Exactly. To centralize and accelerate the analysis of all this new, bizarre information, a multi-agency intelligence fusion cell was formally established at U.S. NORTHCOM headquarters. They called it ATAC, the Anomalous Threat Analysis Cell.
Bringing everyone together.
Crucial interagency effort. Personnel from the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA,
Right.
CIA, NSA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, the satellite folks, and even, interestingly, Department of Energy scientists, likely for portal physics analysis.
And their first finding.
ATAC quickly confirmed that SIG and black hole, the total absence of electronic signatures from the ABE. This meant retasking all national intelligence assets. Focus everything on IMIT imagery intelligence and desperately try to develop any other available collection methods. It highlights just how crucial specialized integrated intelligence is when you face an entirely unprecedented adversary where all your usual methods are useless. And then came the breakthrough. Day 11. A truly game-changing moment, according to the report. A small squad of orc equivalents, apparently isolated after a failed raid on the inner cordon, was successfully captured alive by a Stryker patrol.
The first live prisoners.
The very first. Transported immediately to a secure interrogation facility, they became the first source of human intelligence, or human, on the enemy. Linguists, working frantically around the flock, aided by cutting-edge AI-driven pattern analysis software, began the incredibly arduous process of deciphering their rudimentary language.
What did they learn?
The initial, crucial intelligence revealed a chilling truth. This force, which identified itself as the Ghor-Vash, was merely the vanguard, the spearhead, part of a much larger empire led by some powerful, as yet unidentified entity.
A bigger threat behind them.
Exactly. Their mission, clearly stated through painstaking translation, was to establish a beachhead on our side, to pave the way for a larger, subsequent invasion force. This was the first concrete evidence that the threat wasn't limited to the forces already fighting in Colorado, a revelation with profound, frankly terrifying strategic implications. This is where the entire nature of the conflict pivots. Okay, so armed with that chilling intelligence, we move into day 1521. Localized air superiority is established thanks to the A-10s. The ground perimeter is firmly held by the 4th ID. JTF Centennial now shifts its strategy. It moves from defense to a deliberate campaign of attrition warfare, systematically transforming the exclusion zone into, as the report starkly puts it, a meat grinder for the ABE.
Which prompts that vital question for military strategists, doesn't it? What do you do when you know the enemy currently fighting you is merely a vanguard, and a far greater unknown threat is lurking just beyond that portal? The attrition campaign succeeded in its immediate goal, destroying the Ghor-Vash. But the strategic implications of that human breakthrough are just enormous. It forces a complete rethinking of the war's future.
The new goal was direct and brutal. Destroy the ABE's combat power faster than it could be replaced coming through the portal. The operational tempo, as documented here, became relentless, non-stop.
How did they execute that?
MQ-9 Reapers and RQ-4 Global Hawks maintained 204/7 surveillance. Their advanced sensors identifying any ABE concentration of forces, any supply depots they tried to establish, siege weapon emplacements, anything that moved, basically. Once a target was identified and verified, critical step, it was destroyed with overwhelming and precise firepower.
Artillery and air power.
Relentlessly. M109 Paladin self-propelled howitzers, M270 multiple launch rocket systems, MLRS, positioned safely behind the front lines, conducted continuous fire missions, raining down high explosives, cluster munitions on enemy formations day and night. For targets requiring a more direct approach, or maybe hiding in urban rubble, the A-10s were called in for close air support sorties, employing their cannons and AGM-65 Maverick missiles. The exclusion zone became this systematic meat grinder, just annihilating any ABE forces that ventured out or tried to mass.
It sounds brutal.
It was. But the report emphasizes it wasn't just brute force, it was a methodical, intelligent application of superior firepower.
Yeah.
Leveraging technology, real-time intelligence, and established doctrine to devastating effect against an enemy that could match it technologically.
Did it work? Did it stem the flow?
It had a clear impact. On day 18, ATAC intelligence analysts noted a marked decrease in the rate of new ABE forces emerging from the portal. They were still coming through, but much slower. And offensive actions from the enemy, reduced to just small, infrequent raids, lacking any real coordination or punch. JTF Centennial assessed, based on this intelligence picture, that the Ghor-Vash, the vanguard force, had reached its culminating point of attack.
Meaning they'd shot their bolt.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
That critical military juncture where a force's combat power is exhausted, its logistics strained, and it loses the momentum, the ability to continue its attack effectively. The attrition campaign had unequivocally succeeded in breaking the back of the initial invasion force. This period also allowed for a detailed munitions effectiveness matrix review, basically a scorecard of what worked best against which ABE type. Invaluable data for future planning, obviously.
Any key findings stand out?
Well, as we discussed, the 5.56mm rounds from M4 carbines against the basic ORC equivalent infantry, assessed as low effectiveness, often requiring multiple hits, but the .50 caliber M2 heavy machine guns rated high, proving decisive against infantry in the open. For the larger, TRO-like heavy biologicals, the 25mm cannon rounds from the Bradleys were rated high, their armor-piercing rounds capable of penetrating that tough hide.
And the specialized stuff?
Again, against the armored biologicals, the Javelin ATGM was rated decisive. That top attack mode exploiting the dorsal weakness, consistent one-shot kills. And for the aerial dragons, while air-to-air missiles like the AM-9 Sidewinder had difficulty acquiring reliable heat signatures, the A-10's 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon, also rated decisive. That APEI ammo mix proved to be the definitive anti-dragon weapon system. This systematic evaluation was crucial.
Learning under fire, adapting tactics based on results.
Exactly. So ultimately, what this whole phase reveals is that by day 18, maybe day 20, U.S. forces had decisively broken the back of the initial Ghor-Vash invasion. Hard-won victory. But it came with that chilling revelation, thanks to Human. This is just the opening act. A far larger, more organized threat was waiting just beyond that shimmering portal. Right, so the successful containment and, frankly, destruction of the Ghor-Vash vanguard marked the end of the immediate crisis in Colorado. But it immediately kicked off this profound and incredibly complex strategic dilemma for the U.S. leadership. We're now moving into Phase 4, the strategic shift. This covers day 22 through day 45, and the focus pivots entirely from tactical defense to the long-term strategic resolution of this unprecedented conflict.
And a truly striking aspect of this period, looking through the NSC deliberation notes summarized here, is the sheer calculus of risk at play. The long-term, potentially catastrophic risk of just sitting back, of passivity, waiting for the next wave. That eventually outweighed the undeniable, significant short-term risks of launching an offensive into a completely unknown dimension. It represents a profound strategic shift, and it was driven almost entirely by that intelligence breakthrough about the larger empire.
So from day 22 to day 30, the report details these intense, high-stakes National Security Council meetings, constant sessions, debating the next course of action. 3 primary strategic options were rigorously debated.
What were they?
First, indefinite containment. Basically, make the exclusion zone permanent, fortify it, man it forever. This was seen as the safest option in the short term, minimal immediate risk. But the downsides were huge. A massive permanent commitment of military resources tied down in Colorado indefinitely. And critically, it ceded all initiative to the enemy. It allowed them to rebuild, regroup, and plan a much larger assault on their own timeline, at a time and place of their choosing, perhaps.
Just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly. Second option, portal closure. Scientists at ATAC and elsewhere theorized the portal might be destabilized, maybe collapsed, by a massive energy release, like a targeted EMP or potentially...
Look.
That was definitely on the table, apparently. But this option was fraught with extreme uncertainty. Nobody knew what unpredictable side effects destabilizing an interdimensional portal might have on our dimension, and using a nuclear weapon on U.S. soil.
Right.
Politically, environmentally.
Yeah.
Completely unacceptable. Too risky. Too many unknowns.
Which leaves the third option.
The third option, and by far the most audacious, counter-invasion. Launching a military expedition through the portal to neutralize the threat at its source, or at least disrupt it significantly. This was clearly the highest risk option in the near term. Venturing into a completely unknown environment, no maps, minimal intelligence beyond that radar scan, no idea of the true scale or nature of the forces awaiting them on the other side.
So the front line in Colorado is stable, but the stakes just got infinitely higher. The biggest, most consequential decision of the entire crisis is now on the table. Do we stay hunkered down, or do we take the fight to them?
And the decisive factor in this intense debate, the report makes clear, was that intelligence provided by ATAC. The Human from the captured Ghor-Vash, combined with that continuous global hawk surveillance peeking through the portal. It painted a grim and undeniable picture. The Ghor-Vash wasn't some random raiding party. They were the deliberately deployed spearhead of a vast, aggressive empire.
The conclusion was unavoidable.
The intelligence assessment concluded with high confidence. Inaction, just staying in containment mode, risked a second, far more formidable invasion from this larger empire, an invasion that the U.S. might not be able to contain within Colorado next time. That strategic calculus shifted dramatically. The long-term risk of passivity was now seen as unequivocally greater than the short-term, immediate risk of a preemptive offensive.
A gamble, but a calculated one based on the intel.
A huge gamble. On day 30, following this pivotal intelligence assessment, the president gives provisional authorization for a counteroffensive, codename Operation Threshold. The strategic objectives were carefully limited, though, and notably defensive in their ultimate nature, despite the offensive posture.
What were the objectives?
First, seize and secure a defensible lodgment, a foothold, on the far side of the portal. Second, conduct reconnaissance in force, push out carefully to gather more intelligence on the enemy and their home dimension. Third, disrupt the enemy's capacity to launch that feared second, larger invasion. These were not objectives for conquest, the report stresses, but for long-term survival.
Setting the stage for an unprecedented operation.
Absolutely. So from day 31 to day 40, the entire focus shifts to forging the spearhead for this incredibly audacious invasion. Planning the unprecedented logistics, figuring out the radical adaptations required for a counter-dimensional offensive.
That prompts an important question, doesn't it? About the incredible agility of modern militaries, and just as importantly, their supporting scientific and industrial infrastructure. The rapid development of those wars you mentioned to counter magic, that's a testament to the scientific and engineering ingenuity spurred by an existential threat. This truly pushed beyond any conventional military planning or R&D cycle.
The planning for Operation Threshold presented a logistical problem unlike anything in modern military history. I mean, just think about the sheer physics of it. Every single supply class ag rations and water, Class 3 fuel, Class V ammunition, Class 9X spare parts for tanks and Bradleys, even basic Class 4 construction materials like concertina wire and sandbags had to be meticulously accounted for, packed into containers that could physically fit through the portal's 300 by 150-meter dimensions.
A massive bottleneck.
Huge. Then offloaded and distributed, likely under fire, in what was essentially an active combat zone on the other side. Every soldier, every vehicle, every single bullet, every gallon of fuel, every MRE had to be transported through that single choke point into what the planners called an austere environment with no ports, no airfields, and no roads. The entire concepts of JRSOI, joint reception, staging, onward movement, and integration had to be completely reinvented on the fly for this bizarre expedition.
Who was tasked with figuring that out?
The plan centered heavily on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Combat engineer battalions were designated among the very first units scheduled to go through the portal, right behind the initial assault force. Their immediate critical task was to construct a fortified perimeter, a beachhead, using armored combat earth movers and other heavy equipment they bring with them.
Building defenses on the other side.
Instantly, defensive berms, fighting positions, digging vehicle emplacements, plus establishing a rudimentary forward arming and refueling point, a FARP, for helicopters that would need to operate on the other side, and maybe even scraping out a temporary rough landing strip for MQ-9 Reaper drones to provide persistent aerial surveillance right there. It just showcases the absolutely vital role of the engineers in making the impossible, logistically and tactically possible in such a hostile, undeveloped environment.
And adapting the gear for the fight.
Simultaneously, this massive accelerated effort of wartime adaptation began across the deploying units. Standard equipment loadouts were radically altered based on the lessons learned fighting the Ghor-Vash. Infantry squads were issued a much higher ratio of 7.62mm M240 machine guns, known for their superior stopping power compared to the 5.56mm M4s. Logistical planners massively increased stockpiles of .50 caliber ammunition, those crucial FGM-148 Javelin missiles, and critically, 30mm rounds for the A-10s, which would be providing crucial air support, flying sorties from their bases back in Colorado, reaching through the portal.
So they weren't just planning an invasion. They were literally inventing how to conduct it as they went. The logistical challenges alone are staggering, let alone developing bespoke technologies specifically for a magical enemy.
And on that tech front, DARPA and the Army Research Laboratory, working on an absolutely compressed emergency timeline, rapidly fielded new specialized technologies specifically for Operation Threshold.
Like the wards.
Yeah, these man-portable devices, nicknamed wards, designed to generate targeted electromagnetic fields, intended to disrupt what ABE intelligence, based on interrogations and analysis, suggested was a form of biologically generated magic used by certain ABE types. Think of them less like a sci-fi energy shield, more like an invisible electromagnetic jamming field, specifically tuned, they hoped, to disrupt the biological energy signatures that seem to fuel ABE spellcasting or special abilities.
And specialized ammo.
Based on biological analysis of the captured orc equivalents, Picatinny Arsenal rapidly developed and produced specialized 155mm artillery shells. These weren't designed to kill, but to disperse a potent, non-lethal neurosuppressant chemical agent, specifically tailored to incapacitate orc-equivalent physiology en masse. Crowd control, alien style.
And enhancing the drones.
The MQ-9 Reaper sensor suites were updated with new algorithms, specifically programmed to recognize large biological thermal signatures more effectively, distinguishing them from background clutter, significantly improving targeting efficiency against the ABE, especially at night or in poor visibility. This wasn't just about fighting harder, it was about fighting smarter, leveraging that incredible human and technological ingenuity to counter an entirely new dimension of warfare.
Truly pushing the boundary.
Pushing them into another dimension, literally. Okay, finally we arrive at day 4145, the eve of invasion, the culmination of weeks of chaos, containment, intense intelligence gathering, and truly unprecedented preparation.
And what's fascinating here as the final plans lock into place is that despite the utterly unprecedented nature of the threat, the bizarre environment, the magic, the core principles that underpin the operation remain timeless military fundamentals. Overwhelming firepower, meticulous planning, and robust logistics. This is still a monumental gamble, make no mistake, but its success or failure will ultimately hinge on the resilience and ingenuity of that logistical chain supporting the tip of the spear.
The final days leading up to D-Day for Operation Threshold saw the massing of all the designated forces within the secure exclusion zone in Colorado. This included the 2 Corps Brigade combat teams from the 4th Infantry Division, the Heavy Armor, and the Strikers, plus specialized elements of the 10th Special Forces Group, Airborne, for deep reconnaissance once a foothold was secured, and of course the 4th Combat Aviation Brigade with its formidable AH-64 Apache attack helicopters and CH-47 Chinook heavy-lift helicopters for transport and medevac.
The order of battle was set.
Meticulously. The final order for the Anile Assault Wave. The 3rd Armored Brigade Combat Team, the Heavy Tank Brigade, would lead the assault, punching through to seize and secure that initial beachhead on the other side. They'd be immediately followed by the 1st Stryker Brigade Combat Team, tasked with expanding and consolidating the perimeter, creating breathing room. And, importantly, a 3rd BCT, brought up from Fort Hood, Texas, was held in strategic reserve on the U.S. side of the portal, ready to rapidly reinforce if the initial assault ran into unexpected trouble or heavier resistance than anticipated.
Layers of contingency planning.
Layers upon layers. On day 44, the JTF Centennial Commander presented the final, exhaustive plan to the National Security Council one last time. Logistical preparations were complete, intelligence was as good as it was going to get, forces were coiled in their final forward assembly areas near the portal. After final confirmation, and with the full weight of the nation behind the decision, the President gave the final unequivocal authorization for Operation Threshold to commence.
The logistical requirements for just that initial assault wave must have been mind-boggling. The report likely details those projections.
It does. Just to give you a sense of the scale for the projected first 24 hours of the operation. Planners estimated needing something like 1,200 rounds of 120mm tank ammunition for the Abrams, 150,000 rounds of 25mm cannon rounds for the Bradleys, and a staggering 500,000 rounds of .5mm caliber ammunition, mostly for suppression. They budgeted 400,000 gallons of JP-8 fuel for the vehicles and helicopters expected to operate across the threshold, at least 100 Javelin missiles, anticipating more armored biologicals, around 2,000 rounds of 155mm artillery shells just for the initial suppressive barrages and immediate support, and critically, 500 tons of engineering materials, barriers, wire, bridging equipment earmarked for immediate use in establishing and hardening that initial defensive beachhead.
Those numbers really hammer home the point. The success of the mission from its very first moments hinges as much on the ability to push those supplied through the bottleneck as it does on the combat power of the assault force itself.
Precisely. At H hour, exactly 04.00 Mountain Standard Time on day 45, Operation Threshold commenced. It began with a deafening artillery barrage. Dozens of M109 Paladin self-propelled howitzers and M270 MLRS launchers, positioned safely on the Colorado side, unleashed hell, saturating the area immediately on the other side of the portal. The goal was pure suppression to keep the heads down of any ABE forces guarding the exit point.
Softening the landing zone.
Under the deafening cover of this immense firepower, the lead M1 Abrams tanks and M2 Bradley fighting vehicles of the 3rd Armored Brigade combat team surged forward. Engines roaring, tracks churning up parked grass, they crossed the shimmering, wavering boundaries of the threshold. The United States counter-invasion, a bold, perhaps a desperate leap into the unknown, had officially begun. The wait was over. The moment of truth had arrived. Hashtag outro. So the Colorado Portal crisis and the subsequent Operation Threshold, it represents a true watershed moment in U.S. national security. Based on everything in this report, it revealed some critical vulnerabilities, didn't it, in our traditional emergency preparedness, our defense doctrines.
Absolutely. It showed how quickly a truly out-of-context event could overwhelm systems designed for known threats. But at the same time, it underscored the remarkable flexibility, the ingenuity, and ultimately the sheer power of the modern U.S. armed forces when faced with something utterly unprecedented.
It really redefined what we thought was possible, didn't it? Not just in terms of warfare, but maybe even our understanding of our place in the universe.
Yeah.
Looking back at this comprehensive report, several key takeaways really stand out for me.
Yeah, me too. First, I think, is the enduring value of those niche capabilities. Weapons and platforms like the A-10 Thunderbolt II, the FGM-148 Javelin, things maybe some strategists considered, Cold War relics, they proved absolutely decisive against the unique ABE threats. It powerfully validates maintaining a diverse military portfolio because you simply never know what challenge you'll actually face next.
That's a great point. Second, for me, was the absolute primacy of ISR intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. In that SIGINT black hole, with no electronic signals to intercept, imagery intelligence from the MQ-9 Reapers and RQ-4 Global Hawks was paramount. It allowed U.S. forces to go from blind reaction to informed strategy to seize and maintain the initiative, effectively transforming that chaotic, reactive battlefield into a managed, systematic attrition campaign. You couldn't fight what you couldn't see.
Well said. And third, building on that, is technology as a decisive force multiplier. Superior U.S. technology, from satellite imagery down to those specialized munitions, and even the rapid response counter-magic wards, it inverted the traditional offense-defense balance. The ability to project precise, overwhelming firepower from a distance, coupled with that rapid scientific and engineering adaptation, allowed the U.S. to inflict massive casualties while minimizing its own, creating the conditions where a strategic offensive operation threshold was ultimately deemed a more viable long-term solution than just sitting defensively forever.
And finally, maybe most crucially and often overlooked, logistics. Logistics emerged as the ultimate constraint, but also maybe the unsung hero of the entire conflict. The whole operation, from the initial chaos management to the meticulous planning of the counter-invasion, was fundamentally governed by the unforgiving laws of logistics. That portal itself became the ultimate strategic center of gravity, a physical choke point dictating the pace and scale of all military action. The very success of Operation Threshold from its inception hinged less perhaps on the fighting prowess of the assault force, incredible as it was, and more on the ingenuity of those combat engineers and the sheer resilience of that massive logistical chain reaching into another dimension.
It's an incredible story of adaptation under extreme pressure.
It really is. You've just experienced a deep dive into an event, albeit a fictional one described in this report, that fundamentally reshapes our understanding of national security challenges. It's a profound testament, really, to human ingenuity, resilience, and adaptability in the face of the truly, utterly unknown.
And as those M1 Abrams tanks disappeared through that shimmering portal, pushing into an alien dimension, a new chapter in human history, at least in this narrative, undoubtedly began. What uncharted territories, what unimaginable threats, and maybe what profound, perhaps even world-altering discoveries awaited those stresses on the other side?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it? How will humanity continue to adapt to a universe suddenly revealed to be far larger and potentially far more dangerous than we ever conceived?